A man once walked into a heated meeting. Voices were rising, accusations flying across the room. Everyone was trying to prove they were right. But there was one person who said nothing. He listened, calm, still, watching. And slowly, something strange happened. The loudest voices began to sound weaker. The angrier people began to look foolish. And the quiet man, the one who never raised his voice, became the most powerful person in the room. Why? Because silence has a kind of power that words can never reach. Most people think power comes from speaking more, defending more, explaining more. But the truth is this: the people who control their silence control the situation. Today I want to share 7 truths about why your silence is more powerful than your words. And once you understand these, you will never rush to speak again. The first key point is silence reveals the truth. Because when you stop talking, the world around you begins to show its real face. Most people think truth appears when someone speaks loudly, explains everything, defends themselves. But strangely, the opposite happens. Truth appears when you pause, when you stop reacting, when you allow the moment to breathe. Think about it. When everyone in a room is talking at the same time, nothing becomes clear. It is noise. Just noise. But the moment one person becomes quiet, the atmosphere changes. The quiet person begins to see more than everyone else. You start noticing tone, body language, the small hesitation before someone answers. Silence turns your eyes sharper, your ears more sensitive. It is almost like switching on a light in a dark room. Suddenly, the things that were always there become visible. Imagine you are sitting in a family dinner where 2 relatives begin arguing about something small. Maybe politics, maybe money, maybe who forgot to bring dessert, which by the way is always a very serious issue in some families. One person speaks louder, the other interrupts. Voices climb higher and higher. Now if you jump into the argument, what happens? You become another voice in the storm. But if you stay silent, something interesting happens. You start noticing patterns. One person is not really angry about the topic. They are carrying frustration from somewhere else. Another person is trying to win, not understand. And the person who stays quiet, that person begins to understand the entire situation like a chess player watching the board. Silence gives you the position of the observer. And observers always understand the game better than the players lost inside it. Think of a referee in a sports match. The players are emotional. They run, shout, complain, celebrate. The referee rarely shouts. He watches, calm, focused. And because he watches without emotional noise, he sees the truth of what actually happened. In life, many people are like the players, rushing, reacting, speaking instantly. But the person who practices silence becomes the referee of situations. And let me tell you something, the referee may not score the goals, but they control the entire match. There is a small story about a teacher who once asked his students a strange question. He said, "How do you know who is wise in a group of people?" The students gave many answers. The person who reads the most books, the person who speaks intelligently, the person who has the most knowledge. The teacher smiled and shook his head. Then he said something very simple. The wise person is the one who speaks the least and understands the most. Because when people talk constantly, they reveal pieces of themselves without realizing it. Their fears slip out, their pride slips out, their insecurity slips out. Silence allows you to collect all those pieces like clues in a puzzle. Have you ever asked someone a question and then stayed completely silent? Try it sometime. It is almost magical. People start explaining more and more. Sometimes they even answer questions you never asked. A manager once told me he learned this trick during job interviews. He would ask a candidate one simple question and then just sit quietly. No nodding, no interrupting, just listening. And the candidate would keep talking and talking and talking. After 5 minutes, the manager already knew the person's confidence level, honesty, and attitude, all revealed by silence. The funny part, the candidates thought they were impressing him. In reality, they were simply showing him who they truly were. Silence also reveals the truth about people during difficult moments. Anyone can look kind when things are easy. Anyone can sound supportive when life is comfortable. But watch carefully when tension appears. Watch who becomes patient. Watch who becomes defensive. Watch who tries to control the narrative. And the person who stays silent during that moment begins to see something powerful, the real character of the people around them. It is like watching a movie without background music. Suddenly you notice every small detail, every shift in expression, every tiny pause in someone's voice. There was a young man who once told his mentor that he felt confused about his friends. Sometimes they support me, sometimes they criticize me. I don't know who is genuine. The mentor gave him a simple experiment. For 1 month, he said, "Speak less, just listen more." The young man tried it. At first it felt strange, almost uncomfortable. But slowly he began noticing things he never saw before. Who interrupted others, who listened patiently, who spoke kindly when someone was absent, and who spoke differently when that person left the room. After a few weeks, he returned to the mentor and laughed. "I didn't need advice," he said. "I just needed silence." Silence has this quiet intelligence built into it. It removes the fog from situations. When emotions are loud, truth hides. But when silence enters, truth slowly walks forward, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly revealing itself. And the person who understands this begins to realize something important. You don't always need more information. You don't always need to argue. Sometimes the clearest understanding comes from simply sitting back, saying less, and allowing the world to show you what was already there all along. The second key point is silence protects your dignity. It is the invisible shield that stops your emotions from turning one careless sentence into a lifelong regret. Think about how many arguments in life begin with one small spark, one sarcastic remark, one impatient response, one moment where the heart becomes hotter than the mind, and suddenly words begin flying. Words you never planned to say, words that feel powerful in the moment but heavy later. Much later, silence, in that fragile moment, becomes a guardian. It steps in quietly and says, "Wait, not everything needs a response." Because dignity is not something you defend with louder words, it is something you protect with restraint. Most people believe that staying silent means losing. They think, if I don't reply, people will think I'm weak. But watch carefully how truly strong people behave. When someone insults them, they do not panic. When someone provokes them, they do not rush to prove themselves. They pause, not because they are afraid, but because they understand something deeper. A lion does not roar at every barking dog. If it did, the lion would spend the entire day yelling at small animals. Imagine a lion in the jungle shouting at every squirrel. The jungle would be very noisy, and the lion would look a little ridiculous. Silence saves your energy for battles that actually matter. The rescue? There is an interesting thing about emotional moments. They feel permanent when they happen, but most of them are temporary storms. A person says something harsh. Maybe they had a bad day. Maybe their frustration is coming from somewhere else. Maybe their coffee was terrible that morning. And let's be honest, bad coffee can make anyone dramatic. If you react instantly, the storm grows stronger. But if you stay silent for a moment, the storm often passes on its own. You give time the chance to calm things down. And time is one of the greatest protectors of dignity. I once heard a story about a young employee who felt deeply insulted during a meeting. His manager criticized his work in front of everyone. The young man felt his face getting warm, his mind filled with replies, strong replies. Strong replies, the kind that sound very clever in your head. He wanted to respond immediately, but instead he stayed silent. That evening he went home, thought about the situation calmly, and realized something surprising. The criticism was actually helpful. The manager's tone was rough, yes, but the advice was correct. Imagine if he had reacted angrily in that meeting. The relationship could have been damaged forever. Silence saved him from reacting to tone instead of understanding the message. Silence also protects you from saying things that cannot be taken back. Words are strange like that. Once they leave your mouth, they do not belong to you anymore. They travel, they spread, they echo in people's memories. A single sentence spoken in anger can stay in someone's mind for years, sometimes decades. But silence gives you control. It gives you a small gap between feeling and action. That gap, that small pause, is where maturity lives. It is where wisdom slowly raises its hand and says, "Let me handle this." Have you noticed something funny about arguments? The person who speaks the most usually loses the most respect. They explain too much, defend too much, push their point again and again until people stop listening. Meanwhile, the quiet person sits there calmly, saying little, observing everything, and people begin to trust that person more. Why? Because silence creates the impression of stability, of control. It signals that your emotions are not driving the car, your mind is.
Your mind is.
And people naturally respect someone who can stay calm when everyone else is losing balance. There is also a beautiful kind of confidence hidden inside silence. It is the confidence that says, "I do not need to explain myself to everyone." Think about how much energy people waste trying to prove things, proving they are right, proving they are smart, proving they are important. It becomes exhausting. But the person who values dignity over approval learns a powerful skill, the skill of selective silence. They know when to speak and, more importantly, when not to. They understand that not every opinion deserves an answer. Not every criticism deserves a defense. Sometimes the most graceful response is simply a calm expression, a quiet breath, and the wisdom to let the moment pass without giving it your voice. The third key point is silence makes people listen, because when you do not speak constantly, your words begin to carry weight. Think about the way sound works in the world. When there is noise everywhere, nothing stands out. A busy street, horns everywhere, engines roaring, people shouting. Your brain slowly stops noticing any of it. But imagine the same street suddenly becoming quiet. One single sound appears, maybe a bell, maybe a voice, and instantly everyone notices. Silence creates contrast, and contrast creates attention. The same thing happens with your words. When you speak all the time, people hear you, but they stop truly listening. We have all met that person who talks non-stop. They walk into a room and begin speaking before anyone even finishes, saying hello, stories, opinions, advice, explanations, all pouring out like a faucet that forgot how to turn off. At first, it can be entertaining. But after a while, people begin to drift away. They nod politely, but their mind is somewhere else. Why? Because when words become constant, they lose value. It is like eating chocolate all day. At first, it tastes wonderful. After the 10th piece, even chocolate becomes boring. Now think about someone different. The quiet person in the room. They do not interrupt, they listen carefully. Sometimes they simply smile and observe. Minutes pass, sometimes an entire conversation passes. And then, when they finally speak, something interesting happens. People turn their heads, the room becomes still. Why? Because the brain instinctively pays attention to rarity. The quiet voice becomes the most interesting voice. There was once a senior engineer in a company who had this unusual habit during meetings. While everyone else debated loudly about ideas, he sat quietly, writing notes in a small notebook. At first, new employees assumed he was shy, or maybe uninterested. The discussion would go on for 20 minutes, voices rising, opinions colliding. Then the manager would look toward him and ask, "What do you think?" The engineer would close his notebook, pause for a moment, and speak. Just 2 or 3 sentences. Simple sentences, clear sentences, and almost every time, those sentences solved the entire problem. People started waiting for his opinion. Not because he spoke often, but because he spoke rarely. Silence builds anticipation. It is like a storyteller who pauses before revealing the important part of the story. That small pause makes the listener lean forward. Their mind becomes curious. What will come next? When you speak less, every word feels more intentional. People assume you have thought carefully before speaking. And that assumption creates respect, not forced respect, natural respect. Funny enough, children understand this principle better than adults sometimes. Imagine a classroom full of noisy students, everyone talking at once. The teacher could shout louder and louder to gain control. But many experienced teachers do something different. They simply stop speaking, completely silent. At first, the students continue talking. Then a few notice the silence. One student whispers, "Hey, why did the teacher stop?" Slowly the room becomes quiet. And suddenly the teacher has everyone's attention without raising their voice. Silence pulled the focus of the entire room. This principle works in everyday conversations too. Suppose someone is telling you a story and you interrupt constantly with your own experiences. What happens? They feel unheard. But if you listen patiently, letting pauses exist between responses, something beautiful happens. The other person feels respected. They feel understood. And when you finally add your thoughts, they are much more willing to listen. Silence creates space for connection. Silence also prevents you from wasting powerful words on unimportant moments. Think of your words like arrows. If you shoot arrows all day in random directions, eventually the quiver becomes empty. But if you choose carefully when to release them, each arrow has purpose. Each arrow reaches its target. The quiet person often speaks fewer sentences, but those sentences travel further in P. Yopal's minds, hours later, people remember them. Days later, they repeat them. And sometimes, years later, someone recalls that one simple line you spoke at the right moment, the moment when the room was quiet enough to truly hear it. The fourth key point is silence reveals the intentions of others, because when you stop filling every moment with your own words, people begin to reveal what is truly inside their minds. Most people believe they understand others by what they say, but experienced observers know something deeper. People rarely reveal their real thoughts when they are busy defending themselves, explaining themselves, or competing for attention. Truth comes out in the spaces between words, in the pauses, in the quiet moments when someone feels the need to fill the silence. Silence becomes like a mirror placed in front of them, and many people, without realizing it, start showing their true reflection. Think about how conversations usually happen. Two people talking, interrupting, finishing each other's sentences, trying to prove their point. It becomes like two radio stations broadcasting at the same time, signals crossing everywhere. But now imagine a different situation. You ask someone a simple question and then remain completely silent. No rushing to help them answer, no jumping in to guide the conversation, just quiet attention. Something interesting begins to happen. The other person starts talking more than they planned. They explain more. They add details. Sometimes they even reveal things they never intended to share. There was once a shop owner who hired a new assistant. During the interview, he asked only a few questions, very simple ones. Why do you want this job? Tell me about a challenge you faced before. But after asking each question, he stayed silent. Completely silent, the candidate kept speaking, explaining, adding stories. After 50 minutes, the shop owner already knew the young man's attitude toward responsibility, honesty, and patience. Later, someone asked him, "How did you figure that out so quickly?" He smiled and said something clever. People reveal everything when you give them enough quiet space. Silence makes people slightly uncomfortable, not painfully uncomfortable, just enough that they feel the urge to fill the gap. Humans naturally dislike long pauses in conversation. The brain begins searching for something to say, and when the brain searches quickly, it often forgets to filter carefully. That is when intentions begin to appear. A hidden frustration slips out. A true opinion sneaks into the sentence. A person who was pretending confidence suddenly reveals uncertainty. It is almost like watching a magician accidentally reveal how the trick works. Now imagine a simple dinner gathering. Someone begins talking about their plans for the future. Maybe business plans, maybe personal goals. If you interrupt constantly with advice or opinions, you might miss something important. But if you listen quietly, observing their tone and choice of words, patterns begin to appear. Do they speak with excitement or hesitation? Do they mention teamwork or only personal gain? Do they take responsibility for past mistakes or blame everyone else? Silence gives you time to read these invisible signals. There is also humor hidden inside this skill. A friend once told me he learned more about people at family gatherings by simply sitting quietly near the snack table. He said, "When people think you are not paying attention, they say the most honest things." He would smile, nod occasionally, and let conversations flow around him. After a while, he knew who liked gossip, who loved to exaggerate stories, and who quietly helped clean the dishes without announcing it to the whole room. Silence turned the snack table into a university of human behavior. When you practice this kind of listening, something inside you changes. You become less desperate to control conversations, less eager to impress, more curious about understanding. And that curiosity sharpens your perception. You begin noticing how intentions hide behind words. Some people speak kindly but carry jealousy underneath. Others appear quiet but carry deep loyalty. Silence helps you notice these differences slowly, gently, like adjusting your eyes in a dark room until shapes begin to appear. The beautiful part is that this skill does not require special training or intelligence. It only requires patience. The patience to resist jumping into every pause. The patience to observe instead of reacting. When you give people the gift of quiet attention, they reveal their true priorities, their real values, their hidden motives. And over time, you begin to understand something powerful about human nature. That intentions rarely shout loudly, they whisper softly, and only those who are willing to remain silent long enough can truly hear them. The fifth key point is silence strengthens your mind. It is the quiet training ground where your thoughts become sharper, calmer, and more powerful. Most people think the mind becomes strong by learning more information, reading more books, hearing more advice, and yes, those things help. But there is another training method that is far more subtle: silence. When the noise around you fades, your mind finally begins to hear itself, and many people are surprised by what they discover there. Because most of us spend our days reacting to messages, reacting to opinions, reacting to problems. Silence interrupts that constant reaction and gives the mind something rare: space. Imagine your mind like a glass of water that is constantly being shaken. Notifications, conversations, worries, plans, responsibilities. The glass keeps moving, and when water keeps shaking, what happens? It becomes cloudy. You cannot see through it clearly. You cannot see through it clearly. But when the glass is placed gently on the table and left alone for a moment, something beautiful happens. The water becomes still, the dust settles. Suddenly, you can see straight through it. Silence does the same thing for your mind. It allows your thoughts to settle so clarity can appear. There was a young man who once complained to his grandfather that his mind felt constantly overwhelmed. "I try to think clearly," he said, "but my head is always full of noise." The grandfather smiled and gave him a strange task. Every morning, he said, sit quietly for 10 minutes before speaking to anyone. No phone, no music, no conversation, just silence. The young man tried it reluctantly. The first few days felt awkward. He looked around the room, checked the clock, wondered what he was supposed to be doing. But slowly, something changed. His thoughts began to organize themselves. Problems that once felt confusing suddenly had simple solutions. Silence trains the mind in patience. When we speak constantly, the mind becomes impulsive. It jumps from idea to idea without discipline. But when we practice quiet observation, the mind begins to slow down. It starts asking deeper questions. Is this really important? Is this reaction necessary? What is the best response here? These questions rarely appear when life is loud. They appear when the mind has a moment to breathe. That breathing space is where wisdom quietly grows. Even creativity lives inside silence. Think about the moment when your best ideas appear, rarely in the middle of a crowded conversation, rarely while arguing with someone online. Instead, they appear during quiet moments, while walking alone, while sitting in a calm room, while staring out of a window with nothing urgent, demanding attention. Silence allows the brain to connect ideas in ways that constant noise never allows. It becomes like fertile soil where unexpected insights begin to grow. There is also a funny side to this process. When people first try sitting quietly with their thoughts, they sometimes realize how strange their mind actually is. Random memories appear. Half-finished grocery lists pop up. A childhood song suddenly begins playing in the brain like a broken radio. One moment you are thinking about a work problem, the next moment you are wondering why pigeons walk the way they do. Silence exposes the chaos of the mind at first, but that awareness is actually the beginning of mental strength. Over time, something remarkable happens. The mind becomes less reactive. When someone criticizes you, you do not immediately feel the urge to defend yourself. When a problem appears, panic does not rush in first. Instead, the mind pauses, observes, evaluates. It becomes like a skilled chess player who studies the board before making a move. Silence trains the brain to respond thoughtfully instead of reacting emotionally, and that small difference changes everything. The strongest minds in history understood this secret well. Leaders, thinkers, inventors, many of them valued quiet time deeply. not because they disliked people, but because they respected the power of stillness. They knew that a calm mind sees first, then a noisy one. Silence sharpens attention, it strengthens focus, it allows the mind to separate what truly matters from what only appears urgent. And slowly, almost invisibly, the person who practices silence begins to notice a change inside themselves. A growing sense of control over their own thoughts, their own emotions, their own decisions. The Sikhs teach key point is silence ends many conflicts before they even begin. It quietly removes the fuel that arguments need in order to grow. Most disagreements in life do not explode suddenly. They grow slowly, like a small spark touching dry leaves. A comment, a reaction, a second reaction, and suddenly the fire begins spreading. Voices rise. Pride enters the room, and what could have been a small misunderstanding turns into a long, exhausting conflict. But silence interrupts that chain. Silence removes the oxygen. Without oxygen, even the brightest flame cannot survive. Think about the last argument you witnessed. Maybe it was at work, maybe at home, maybe two strangers arguing over something as small as a parking space. Watch carefully how these situations unfold. One person says something sharp, the other responds immediately. Now the first person feels attacked, so they reply again. Back and forth it goes, like a tennis match where the ball is made of frustration. But imagine if one of them simply stopped returning the ball. Just silence. Just calm presence. The match suddenly becomes very strange because one player is still swinging, but there is no ball coming back. Silence does not mean accepting disrespect. That is important to understand. Silence simply means choosing not to multiply the problem. There is a difference between defending your values and feeding someone's anger. Sometimes the most powerful response is to step back mentally and refuse to participate in emotional chaos. It is like standing on the shore while someone else is splashing wildly in the water. You do not need to jump in just because they are making waves. There is a small story about a man who worked in a busy office where one colleague had a reputation for arguing with everyone. This colleague could turn the smallest issue into a dramatic debate. One day, he approached the man with a complaint about a minor mistake in a report. His voice was already rising. The man listened quietly, he nodded once, said, "I understand," and returned to his work. No counterattack, no defense speech, just calm acknowledgement. The angry colleague stood there for a moment, clearly prepared for a fight that never happened. After a few seconds, he simply walked away. The conflict dissolved before it had a chance to grow. Sometimes silence also protects relationships. Words spoken in anger often aim to win the moment, not protect the bond. And winning the moment can be expensive, very expensive, very expensive. A husband once joked that he learned the value of silence during his early years of marriage. He said, "I realized I had two choices, prove I am right or stay married." The room laughed, but hidden inside that joke was wisdom. In many situations, especially with people we love, silence gives space for emotions to cool before permanent damage is done. Another fascinating thing happens when you refuse to engage in unnecessary conflict. The other person begins to hear themselves. When two people argue loudly, each voice hides the other. But when one voice disappears, the remaining voice becomes very clear. The angry person suddenly hears the intensity of their own words. Sometimes they even pause and think, "Why am I still arguing?" Silence becomes a mirror where they see their own behavior more clearly. Silence also keeps your energy safe. Arguments consume enormous emotional energy. They leave the mind tired and the heart heavy. Hours later, you may still replay the conversation in your head, thinking of clever things you should have said. Silence protects you from that endless mental replay. It allows you to walk away with your peace intact And peace is a powerful thing to carry through the day. People who master this skill often appear surprisingly calm in situations where others lose control. They understand that not every comment deserves a reaction, not every disagreement deserves a debate. Some situations improve with explanation, but many improve with quiet patience. When someone throws anger toward you and you respond with silence, the anger has nowhere to land. It falls to the ground on its own, like a ball dropped without anyone there to catch it. The seventh key point is silence builds inner power. The kind of strength that does not shout, does not rush, and does not need constant approval to stand tall. Many people imagine power as something loud. A powerful person must speak confidently, command attention, dominate conversations. That is what movies often show us. But real inner power is much quieter than that. It does not demand the room's attention, it naturally receives it. Think of the deep ocean. On the surface, there may be waves, noise, storms, even. But deep below, there is calm, immense strength. Silence helps you live from that depth instead of from the noisy surface. When a person begins practicing silence, something subtle changes inside them. They stop reacting to every small opinion thrown their way. Someone criticizes them, and instead of instantly defending themselves, they pause. Someone doubts their ability, and instead of rushing to prove something, they simply continue their work. This quiet stability confuses people at first. Because most people are used to reactions, reactions are predictable. But when someone responds with calm silence, the situation shifts. T. His silent person seems grounded, almost unshakable. There is a story about a martial arts teacher who once explained this idea to his students. He placed 2 cups of water on the table. One cup was full but still. The other cup had water constantly being stirred with a spoon. Which one is stronger? He asked. The students looked confused. Both cups looked the same. Then he stopped stirring the second cup. Slowly the water settled. Strength, he said quietly, is not the movement you see, it is the stability beneath it. Silence creates that stability inside a person. It allows you to remain centered while the world around you keeps stirring. People who depend on noise often depend on approval too. They need constant reassurance, constant validation. If someone praises them, they feel strong. If someone criticizes them, their confidence collapses. It becomes exhausting to live like that. Silence helps break that cycle. When you become comfortable with quiet moments, you learn to stand with your own thoughts without needing an audience. You learn to trust your direction even when no one is clapping. There is also a beautiful freedom hidden in this kind of inner power. Imagine not feeling the need to explain every decision, not feeling pressured to respond to every opinion, not feeling disturbed by every negative comment that appears in your life. Silence becomes like a protective space where your confidence grows privately. The tree does not shout while its roots grow deeper underground. Yet those unseen roots are exactly what allow the tree to stand tall during storms. Sometimes people mistake silence for weakness at first. They might think the quiet person has nothing to say, but time slowly reveals the truth. When challenges appear, the loudest people often panic first. The calm ones, the quiet observers, they remain steady, they think clearly, they respond thought fully. And suddenly everyone notices something surprising. The quiet person is actually the most reliable one in the room. There is also humor in this transformation. A friend once joked that he used to argue with everyone online. Every comment section became his personal battlefield. One day, he decided to try something radical. He stopped replying completely. A week passed. Then 2 weeks. Finally, he said something funny. I discovered something amazing. When you stop arguing with strangers on the internet, they stop arguing with you. Silence saved him hours of stress and probably several thousand unnecessary heartbeats. Inner power grows slowly like this. It is not dramatic. It does not arrive with fireworks or applause. Instead, it builds quietly through small moments. The moment you choose not to react, the moment you listen instead of interrupting, the moment you allow silence to speak louder than your impulse to prove something. Over time, these small moments reshape the way you carry yourself in the world. Your presence becomes calmer, your words become deliberate, and the people around you begin to sense something different, a quiet confidence that does not need noise to exist. So when you leave this moment and return to your daily life, remember something simple. Not every situation requires your voice. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is pause, breathe, and let silence do its quiet work. Because silence gives you vision when others are blinded by emotion. It protects your dignity when anger is knocking at the door. It makes your words valuable instead of ordinary. It reveals what people truly mean behind what they say. It strengthens your mind so you respond with wisdom instead of impulse. It dissolves many conflicts before they ever have the chance to grow. And slowly, almost invisibly, it builds a deep kind of inner power, a power that does not depend on noise. You will still speak, of course. Silence does not mean becoming mute, but your words will begin to come from a different place, a calmer place, a clearer place. And people will notice, not because you try to impress them, not because you argue louder than everyone else, but because when you speak, it will feel intentional. Your voice will carry weight, your presence will feel steady. And in a world that is constantly rushing to react, rushing to explain, rushing to prove something, the person who can remain calm in silence becomes rare. Rare people stand out without trying. Rare people create space for wisdom to enter the room. So, the next time life places you in a moment of tension, when emotions rise, when opinions collide, when the urge to react appears inside you, pause for a moment. Let silence sit beside you. You may discover that the most powerful response you have is not something you say, it is something you choose not to say. And in that quiet moment, you may realize something beautiful. Peace was never far away, it was simply waiting for a little silence.